Hi, my name is Tim Janisewski. Welcome as we continue to spotlight the Gospel of Matthew. We are doing this in order to give you a point of reference for perhaps your own daily devotional walk of faith. As you hear my comments, you read and ask God to speak to you through the text itself, and take time to pray. Ask God to guide and direct your Christian life so that you learn to live and live to serve. Of course, we are now in the Sermon on the Mount, that greatest of all time sermons. We just finished a section in chapter 6, verses 1 through 18, about the greater righteousness, and a righteousness that seeks the approval of God, not the approval of our fellow human beings. Now Jesus is turning in verses 19 through 24 to our next section, and it has to do with a key word, mammon, in the old authorized version. We should not be seeking mammon. Well, few people know what mammon is today, so oftentimes this word is translated in verse 24 as wealth or money or possessions. And my kind of colloquial term for this word for mammon is stuff, because that's what it refers to, stuff. The stuff could be money, the stuff can be property, the stuff can be possessions, the stuff can be houses, the stuff can be anything of a material value. And I think it's interesting, that Jesus addresses stuff, materialism, if you will, back in the first century. And that, quite frankly, was a culture and a time where people didn't have very much stuff. If people have stuff, if a culture has stuff, there's no culture like our American culture in terms of quantity of possessions, of mammon, of money, of things, so to speak. So let's hear what Jesus has to say on this very relevant topic, perhaps even more relevant now than it was when Jesus first spoke it. Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 24 from the English Standard Version. Jesus says, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth," that's the mammon, the stuff, "where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in to steal. But lay up for yourself treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in to steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Isn't that a great verse? For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Verse 22, "The eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body is full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be filled with darkness. If the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon / money / possessions / stuff. There's Jesus' word having to do with this important subject. And I think it is at its root a subject having to do with idolatry. Another word, we don't use that frequently in our culture today, but perhaps the great enemy of the people of God in the Bible is idolatry. And what is an idol? An idol is anything that is placed in the position of God. It replaces God. It exceeds God. It becomes, if you will, God instead, or outside of the true one living God. And we think sometimes in terms of the Old Testament cultures, rightly so, that made their idols out of wood, or maybe made their idols out of metal. And we think, how could they bow down and worship before pieces of wood or a slab of metal of some sort that they had shaped with their own hands? Well, let's not get too carried away, because we worship our own wood and metal just in a much more sophisticated fashion. We call them houses built largely of wood. But how many people spend their lives acquiring homes, caring for homes, spending their energy thinking about their piece of property, the wood that constitutes their house? It can become an idol. It doesn't need to be an idol, but it can become an idol. Or in terms of metal, how many people fixate, spend time, are just driven to buy the best vehicle, to have the SUV of their dreams, to have several vehicles, that car they always wanted to have. How many spend hours and hours and hours spending their life energy on a piece of metal called a vehicle or a car or a minivan, whatever it may be, your truck? See, we do have our own idols of wood and metal. We're just a little more sophisticated about how we dress up those idols. And Jesus says that you cannot serve both God and mammon, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be. And your treasure is going to be either in the things of earth or ultimately in the things of heaven. You know, there's a great story that was written by Leo Tolstoy, that great Russian author, back in 1886. It was entitled, "How Much Land Does a Man Need?" And the way the story goes is that the main character, Pahom, is saying to himself that if he just had enough property, he would not fear the devil himself. Well, in the story, it so happens the devil is listening on to Pahom and takes that up as a challenge. And he says, "I will give Pahom all the land he could ever want and will snatch it away from him in an instant." Well, Pahom goes on and indeed succeeds. He begins to acquire more and more property. He becomes a wealthy man with servants. And then Pahom reads of the land grab of a lifetime. There is an ignorant group of people who want to sell their land for a very cheap price, and they have an interesting way of allotting the property. What they say is, for this certain amount of price, you can start at one point and run a big circle starting at first light and sunup, but you must return back to that starting point no later than the last ray of light going over the edge of the horizon in the evening. So Pahom, fit as a fiddle, says, "Oh, this is a great opportunity." And he goes out, and his eyes are bigger than his ability, and he draws the big circle and just thinks about all the land he's going to acquire. But then as late afternoon, evening is coming on, he realizes he needs to make a mad dash back to his starting point, or else he will not only not get the property, but that the landowners will get to keep his money. So he runs with all his might, and just as that last ray of light is going over the horizon, he reaches his goal, and people are cheering for him because Pahom has made it. But then, due to exhaustion, he has a massive heart attack and drops dead right on the spot. And so the devil gives him more land than he thought he could ever have and snatches it away from him in an instant. You know, we live in a culture that says you can have it all, but you can't have it all. You can't have everything. You can have possessions, but they will be snatched from you with that last breath that you take. But with the last breath that we take, that is the point at which our treasures in heaven fully begin to open to us in a way that the devil can never steal away from us, that we can never lose, because they are the treasures of heaven and they are the gift of God for the people of God. So friends, do know we cannot serve God and stuff. We ultimately have to choose. It's not both and. It has to be ultimately in our allegiances a case of either or. You know, a final thing that we'll say about this particular passage is there's that strange little saying by Jesus in the middle about your eye being clear. And if your eye is clear, your body sees well. If it's unclear, then there is darkness. What Jesus is saying there is that this teaching is that important. If you see clearly that you can have treasures in heaven or treasures on earth, if you see clearly that you can serve God or you can serve stuff and live accordingly, then your spiritual eye is clear and your life will be full of spiritual light through Jesus Christ by the power of the Spirit. But if you do not understand this lesson, if your eye is unclear, if it's compromised spiritually, if somehow you think that indeed you can acquire and have Jesus just as well, or that your allegiances can be split, or that Jesus can be your helper and your own ability to get things by your own hand is the ultimate arbiter, then your spiritual eye will be dark, and how great the darkness will be. What's Jesus saying? We got to get this one right. We have to understand where your treasure is, there your heart will be, and we cannot serve God and stuff. That's our devotion for today. Read the passage yourself, give it some thought, give it some prayer, and see if God's calling you to take some action in this most important area. If you like this, let us know on Facebook and share it with others, and we'll talk to you next time.